welcome back to another episode of Grace Online Service. And just want to thank God for giving this time once again to all of us, the last day of the year and the last minute of the year. I just want to share a beautiful verse from our Bible during this time, that is from Psalm chapter 100, verses 1 till 5. Shout out for joy to the Lord, all the earth, worship the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful songs. Know that the Lord is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pastures. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and praise his name, for the Lord is good and his love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations. As today is the last day of the year, I just want to thank God for blessing all of us here with good health and with his love and mercy for the next year. I just hope that and pray that our God will give us new promises and new wisdom to enter the new beginning of the year with gladness and joy. And as of now, I want to welcome our pastor for the sermon. Happy New Year, guys.
Greetings to you in the name of our beloved Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Shall we all turn our Bible to the book of Joshua? Joshua chapter 3, verse 7 to 17. Joshua chapter 3, verse 7 to 17. And the Lord said to Joshua, This day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. You shall command the priests who bear the ark of the covenant, saying, When you have come to the edge of the water of the Jordan, you shall stand in the Jordan. So Joshua said to the children of Israel, Come here and hear the words of the Lord your God. And Joshua said, By this you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Hivites and the Perizzites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is crossing over before you into the Jordan. Now, therefore, take for yourselves 12 men from the tribes of Israel, 1 man from every tribe, and it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests who bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, that the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off, the waters that come down from upstreams, and they shall stand as a heap. So it was, when the people set out from their camp to cross over the Jordan, with the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people, and as those who bore the ark came to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests who bore the ark dipped in the edge of the water, for the Jordan overflows all its banks during the whole time of harvest, that the waters which came down from upstream stood still and rose in a heap very far away at Adam, the city that is beside Jerethan. So the waters that went down into the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, failed and were cut off, and the people crossed over opposite Jericho. Then the priests who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all Israel crossed over on dry ground until all the people had crossed completely over the Jordan. This is the word of the Lord. I want to entitle my message as From Wilderness to the Promised Land. From wilderness to the promised land. We have spent the year 2020 and now we are looking forward to the new year and new opportunities. We have been in the wilderness and now looking forward to the promised land. If you have ever spent any time in the wilderness of life, then you have probably spent time thinking about the promised land, that place where life will be better, the place where life will be more settled and easier. Each of us could tell a story of life in the wilderness. It is that place where life is just difficult, Life in the wilderness is a struggle to just get up each morning and make it through the day. Life in the wilderness, we walk and walk and get nowhere. Then we discover we have been walking in circles. No matter what we do, progress just eludes us. In the wilderness, you feel lost, you feel confused, and not sure which way to go or what to do. In the wilderness, it takes all your effort to just survive. The wilderness of life is large and overwhelming. We, by comparison, we feel small and vulnerable. Life in the wilderness is exhausting. In the wilderness, you have to face up to yourself and your life, and there is no place to hide. 2020 was a wilderness. 2020 is a wilderness and was a wilderness, and now we are looking forward for a new year. I want to share 6 lessons we can learn from this text that we have just read out. The first lesson: for every wilderness, there is a promised land. For every wilderness, there is a promised land. The Israelites looked forward to see the promised land with a lot of excitement and joy and optimism. We all have some idea of what the promised land will be like. Our promised land generally corresponds to our wilderness experience. So, for most of us, the promised land is either a return to the way things were before, back in the good old days, or it is a jump forward into a better future. But either way, we want to escape the wilderness. So, for those who wander in the wilderness of deep sorrow, in the wilderness of deep sorrow, lost, and tears, the promised land might be a place of joy, where memories no longer cripple you, where tears no longer flow, and enthusiasm for life returns. But for those who know the wilderness of loneliness, the promised land is a place of relationship. The promised land is a place of acceptance and belonging. And in the wilderness of fear, the promised land is about security, control, and predictability. For those of you who live in the wilderness of unhappiness, we long for a promised land of fulfillment and meaning. Sometimes the wilderness is simply about moving, changing, and growing. Even though those are good things, even though those are welcome, the way can still be hard. The way can still be tiring, and the way can still be dangerous, perilous. If the wilderness is about survival, then the promised land holds before us the image of living, real living. So most of the time we want to escape the wilderness. If we could have our way, we would probably like God to plug us out of the wilderness and set us down in the promised land. That's not how it works. God does not rescue or save us from the circumstances of our lives. Instead, God goes through those circumstances with us. For every wilderness, there is a promised land. Second lesson: for every promised land, there is a river Jordan that must be crossed. For every promised land, there is a river Jordan that must be crossed. The river Jordan is a boundary between the wilderness and the promised land. And it is the obstacle standing between us and the promised land. Joshua has led the Israelites to the Jordan River. And the promised land is in sight. They can see the promised land from the bank of the Jordan River. 400 years of slavery and 40 years in the wilderness wandering have brought them to the very edge of the promised land. Oh, they have hoped. They walked, they suffered, they prayed, they talked, they cried, they trusted, they regretted, they sinned, and they complained their way to this particular moment. What do they see? What do they see? Standing on the edge of this River Jordan, what do they see? They see a river in flood stage, overflowing its banks. There is no low water crossing its sight. The river is, scholars say, 150 miles long. They cannot go around it. There are no bridges. They cannot go over it. The way is blocked. The river is impassable. There is neither a good time nor a good place to cross. More often than not, that is how our River Jordan looks. We forget, however, that this is not our time or place. God has chosen and brought Israel to this time and place, even as God chooses to bring us to the time and place of our river crossing. For every wilderness, there is a promised land. And for every promised land, there is a river, Jordan, that must be crossed. And the third lesson, the only way across the river is through the river. The only way across the river is through the river. Looking at the river, one may lose hope or be in despair. But wait a minute. We never go alone. God himself goes into the river. Let us not forget, he is the God of water crossings. God was there as Noah drifted across the flood of waters that swept away the old world and received to reveal a new world, a new life, a new relationship. God wrestled with Jacob in the night and blessed and renamed him, and then watched him limp across the river Jabbok with a new identity, Israel. God called his people out of bondage in Egypt and through the Red Sea to a journey of salvation. The only way across the river is through the river. But we should not be afraid of the river because we don't go alone. God is with us. The fourth lesson, every crossing is an act of God's faithfulness. Every crossing is an act of God's faithfulness. We each have a Jordan River that must be crossed, and usually more than one. It seems that life of faith is a series of water crossings. The Jordan River, however, is not a geographical feature. It is a part of our inner landscape. Crossing the Jordan, entering the promised land, will not change the circumstances of our lives. It changes us, and that changes everything. Like Israel, we stand at the edge of the Jordan, and the only way into the promised land is through the flood waters of life. The people of Israel, as they stood on the edge of River Jordan, they might be asking, how deep is it? How solid is the bottom? Is it slippery? Is the water cold? Or how strong is the current? How far across is the river? What will I find on the other side? All good questions. And in some way, these are the questions of life. The questions that arise every time we make a move, whether geographical, emotional, or spiritual. They are questions that get answered before we step. They are not questions that get answered before we step into the river of new life. They are not questions that get answered before we step into the river of new life. So every crossing is an act of God's faithfulness. So that will lead us to the fifth lesson. Ultimately, it is God, not the answers, that take us across our Jordan. It is God, not the answers, that takes us across our Jordan. God, however, did not hold back the water for Israel before they put their feet in. It is only after they step into the water that God acted. The waters do not part until we step out in faith, until our feet are dipped in that impassable river. God can only work with what we give Him. Standing on the bank, waiting for answers, waiting for a better time and place, or waiting for the flood to subside offers God nothing with which to work. God will not act. The river will continue to rage and we will remain stuck. So, the first step, however, gives God something to work with. That will lead us to the sixth lesson. One step is all it takes. One step is all it takes. As soon as Israel's feet were dipped in the edge of the water, God acted. The flowing waters stood still. There was dry land, and all the people crossed over. With that one step, we follow the ark of God's presence into the Jordan. We all have that one step, that first step that needs to be taken. Take that first step and you have offered God something with which to work. The flood waters of life will be parted. The flood waters of your life will be parted. Dry land will be revealed and the way forward will be open to you. So what is that first step for you? There are as many first steps as there are circumstances of life. Maybe the first step is to offer another forgiveness and reconciliation with someone whom you have grudges. Maybe your one step is to let go of anger and resentment. Maybe your first step is to let go of habitual addiction. Maybe your life is unmanageable and that first step is just one of 12. Sometimes the first step is to simply be quiet, be still and listen. Perhaps your first step may be to let go of having to be right or in control. Maybe it means you no longer let fear dominate your life. Maybe that one step is taking responsibility for your life. Maybe that one good step is to start opening the Bible and reading it every day. My friends, I do not know your first step, but I trust that God does. I do not know when or how you will cross your Jordan, but I know it happens one step at a time, and that first step always takes us to a new land. And that first step will always take us to a new way of being. That first steps will always take us to a new life, God's life. So my friends, step out in faith. Get your feet wet and you will reach the promised land. God bless you all. And I wish you all the blessed New Year. Amen.